You're listening to the PR Wind Down Podcast, the podcast for public relations professionals that are ready to see real change in the PR industry. Here are your hosts, April White and Laura Schooler.
Hey, welcome back. You're listening to the Trust Relations PR Wind Down. I'm April White.
And I'm Laura Schooler.
All right, our guest today is Mike Bush. He's a longtime PR pro colleague and good friend of ours.
And we're back this week with more PR news, fails, and scary stories to share from our anonymous audience.
All right. Ooh, I feel like there should be some spooky Halloween music when you say that. All right, let's get ready to wind down.
So we're going to continue this week with some PR news of the day.
Well, one thing I want to talk about today is the Bari Weiss resignation letter as well.
Right, the New York Times.
Did you have a chance to read that? What did you think of it?
Well, I'm just a little skeptical of anybody who's too segmented or too far to one side. And I feel like she might be one of those people.
Could be. I mean, she is an op-ed writer, so she has a right to be.
Yes.
So for that, and I think what she spelled out in the letter is that she was brought in to provide this alternative voice, which I think is something that is valuable to the Times. It's unfortunate to hear that it didn't seem like something that was well received by journalists, you know, who are, I mean, I think it kind of goes back to our previous conversations and this idea of letting too much opinion enter the news. I think op-eds is where it belongs, and that's where there's always been a section for that. So she has a right to be that person, right? Yeah. And I think that if you don't allow for her to have that right as an op-ed writer, it's pretty strange. And I think it also kind of shows that there's been a blurring of lines between the news and op-eds. I know I even read recently the Washington Post story on Kanye West running for president, and and it was really well written, but I was really shocked at how much to me it read like an op-ed. I could like the tone of it, the style, the approach. It was just like, wow, this isn't written like a news story at all. And then I looked, I was like, it must be an op-ed. I was like, it's not an op-ed. This is a news story. I can't, you know, I think what I'm finding jarring is somebody who studied journalism and started out as a reporter with a certain mindset of what that meant. I think part of what her letter calls out is that there is this funny blurring of the line between op-ed and news.
Right.
And in my mind, the news is always meant to be the portrayal of both sides of a story, unless it's an op-ed. And then
right, which is what she was hired to do.
That's what she was hired to do. I mean, you don't have to agree with her opinions, but to not allow a voice, even if it's a dissenting opinion, to exist at some place like the New York Times is pretty alarming to me.
So, I mean, I know that she said that basically news or what they're writing about is being dictated by Twitter. You know, that was sort of her.
That was the one piece that I was a little bit not following to the degree I'd followed the rest.
So I'm looking at it right now. It says what she said is Twitter is not on the masthead of the New York Times, but Twitter has become its ultimate editor. I sort of wonder if it's what you were talking about the other day, or if maybe ultimately it's about the fact that publications, including the New York Times, have not been able to make money the way they used to through advertising, so they sort of have to bend to the will of advertisers. And is that playing into this? And is that what the Twitter comments is sort of tangentially about?
I imagine it is. That was the one piece I wish she had elaborated on a bit. And I didn't have a chance to dig and see if she did discuss that with anybody in subsequent interviews or anything to see if there was more detail on it.
I don't know.
But I did agree with her in general that if we get to a place where we shut down a voice that we don't agree with, I do agree with her that that's actually illiberal.
Well, illiberal, right? Somebody said that. I didn't know that was a word. Somebody wrote. I
said that.
You did?
Yeah. And then I was like,
see, I was like, some genius said that and it was you. So here's my other question. Do you think she's no longer there because she had an opinion or because of something else? Are they going to hire somebody like her and she just wasn't the right?
Sounded like she left because she was getting bullied. And I think that's really alarming too, because once again, it's like, I think that, and this is getting a bit political, but I think liberal means that you're accepting of all people and all voices and all opinions. And I think that doesn't mean you're accepting of people that are different from you, but only in these categories. I think that means you're accepting of people and voices
No matter what.
No matter what, even if you really disagree with what they have to say, vehemently, right? And I think for free speech and, freedom of the press to exist in the way that it has, it needs to continue, in my opinion, that is it's a tenet, right, of that profession. So for me, I found it pretty alarming to hear that somebody like Bari was being bullied and harassed and cajoled and all these other the ways she's describing it, and did so eloquently. To me, it didn't read like I was blown away, to be honest, by her writing style. I was like, this woman can write circles around anyone. I don't know if I've seen somebody with such a mastery of the written language. So I mean, it was not written as a crazy person. It was not written without a lot of thought and a lot of careful consideration, and everything was crafted. It wasn't compelling. Off the cuff. Yeah, it was very compelling. It wasn't off the cuff. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't angry. It was just like, this is what happened to me and this is why it's an issue. And so I thought it was interesting. I hope that it's a bit of a wake-up call if that was really happening. I mean, obviously, without having been there, we're just hearing her side of the story.
Yeah, I'm inclined to believe her, but like I said, is it most things these days that seem very unfortunate are usually driven by money. So like I said, is this really because they need to basically kowtow to their advertisers in some way, either directly or indirectly? And they thought that she was, limiting that.
It might have been that, or it might have been that she wasn't getting through the stories that she was writing and they were getting canned, and she felt like, what she actually had to say wasn't getting published. I mean, we'll see where she pops up, but
it's just so funny to me that so many people are now saying that the New York Times is not a liberal publication when people were screaming a few years ago about how it's only a liberal publication. Like,
that's interesting.
Right? I mean, was it like a liberal newspaper and now it's not?
But I feel like that's also because culturally what liberal means has shifted.
It's different.
We were talking about this the other day, right? Yeah. Like liberal in the classic sense that I was just discussing,
right,
is not exactly matching all of the elements of the left.
The alt liberals these days who are like, you must say this and do this or we're going to erase you from existence. Right. Yeah, that's not liberal.
No, that's entering McCarthyism era.
Right, that's fascism on the other side of the same coin.
Right.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think maybe before it was being used like the left paper.
Right.
But they were using liberal and left interchangeably. And I think what we're seeing is that no longer applies. So it might still be a left paper, but the left is not liberal in the classic sense that we used to think of it as.
Right.
Which is why when we talk and it's like, wow, I used to think I was liberal. It's like, I suddenly feel like, whoa, like I am not over there. Like what
Yeah.
I think it's more that the left has shifted away from liberal and into something that's a bit more extreme.
The cancel culture.
Yeah. Because that's not liberal. So it kind of brings me back to thinking about, Bari Weiss's resignation letter and this whole idea of, is it news or is it an op-ed? And I think that when I switched from being a newspaper reporter to being in public relations, in my mind, what I was doing was the same thing as switching from being a judge to being an attorney. So you decide, okay, now I'm going to advocate for one side of the story. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to be this person's, I'm going to push their narrative and I'm going to push it hard. And I know it won't always come through that way, but at least I'm advocating for the client's perspective and point of view. And so I think when I see the news and it reads to me like PR writing, that's where I start to get confused, because I used to think there was a clear delineation between news writing and PR writing, right? Or narrative writing. And narrative writing is something that's done by op-ed writers like Bari. But I don't think that it has a place in news, because otherwise everybody is doing PR, and then where's the pristine practice of journalism happening?
Right. Does it exist anymore?
Right.
Where does it exist?
Yeah. So I think there does need to be a broader conversation in the industry about what they really want journalism to continue to look like. But to Laura's point from before, I mean, if there's that big of a pressure coming from advertisers,
Got to make money somehow, right?
well, and
Stay
then
in
of
business.
course it would of course lead to these narratives getting heavier and heavier, and it's not such a good. It's not such. I mean,
don't
it
know
would.
what you do.
Well, it
It's
also
almost-
leads. It also leads to things being less liberal, because it's going to lead to whatever those corporations want. You know, like if they have that much power over the news and they're pushing down with that much force, then you start to lose that ability to have a marketplace of ideas.
So can you make, so how do you, you know, and it's happening more and more and more, obviously. So how do you try to fix that? Is it like maybe some super duper rich person who establishes an independent foundation, like, you know, universities have endowments that start like big national news or fund the New York Times that really, so they don't rely so heavily on advertisers' dollars, and that they really don't have anybody who's got some political agenda pulling the strings? Is that possible?
I mean, I think it's possible. I'd like to see it happen. That'd be really interesting to have it be truly independent.
I will head that.
Okay. Let's find the money. I mean, that would be incredible, because and I mean, for me, the idea of having a place where you really could go get feedback and ideas and news that's got all the perspectives in it would be something I would pay a lot of money for. All right, let's hear our anonymous PR horror story of the day. Do you want to do the honors, Laura?
Hi, I'm a television producer who often works with a widely respected small PR agency. In reviewing publicity materials for one of my recent projects, I began to notice a lot of copy errors, grammatical mistakes, misspelling of names, even incorrect showtimes. I pointed out this issue and got some flack for it from both the agency and from my management. Short of firing a firm and burning bridges, what is the best way to rectify issues like these when they seem to frequently occur?
That's a good question. First of all, I don't understand why he would have gotten flack for pointing it out, unless it was done in a slightly aggressive or overly critical way. I mean, that to me seems like just providing professional feedback. Right. So I don't understand that.
Why the agency like responded negatively? No, yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
That doesn't make any sense to me. So I don't follow how that would have happened. In terms of providing feedback to the agency, I think it would be a matter of sometimes I've seen this happen when clients provide too many different renditions of edits to things. And so if there are like three
changing their mind or something,
or there's 3 client contacts and they all send their feedback separately.
Yeah.
And when that happens, this can happen. So sometimes I think it's a matter of reducing, take your time with each rendition and make sure that all of the edits you want in each one are done. So there's only 2 different rounds of edits.
Figure it out all internally and then send it to us. So, because a lot of times you get conflicting edits from 2 different people, right?
And that can definitely lead to that issue. Misspelling,
there's no excuse for it.
There's not an excuse for that. It could be,
unless it's somebody's name and you don't, but like there's spell check for like real words.
I still sometimes get nervous about Google Documents, and I know that makes me old school, but only because you can pop in and be in it on accident. And if multiple people can do that and they have it open and they start typing and then they go somewhere else, it can lead to weird mistakes. And then I would say talking to them to find out, hey, I've noticed this has been a recurring issue. Is there something I can do to help you? Because the other thing could happen in terms of like the shows being wrong is sometimes clients, because everybody's moving really quick, it's like they Slack you one show time and then they email you another show time and then they tell you another thing on the phone. And if you get things in too many different ways and too many people are working on the account, that would lead to those kinds of factual problems.
And then what about from his management?
That is really strange to me. That to me, my guess on that one is that the agency owner and his managers are friends or something. So there's some kind of behind the scenes relationship. So maybe there's a political line that he's breaking that he
Right.
doesn't know. I don't know, it's just my guess. Because there are a lot of, you do have to take these things into account. You never know who's got relationships that go beyond relationships that led to the engagement. So then in that case, you do need to tread a little bit lightly, but I still think you have to fix the problem, because otherwise you're going to keep getting a lot of materials with mistakes.
Yeah.
Grammatical mistakes is kind of what I would say is maybe recommend that they budget in proofreading for everything and have a proofreader. So, and it could be that you just decide, I'm going to have a proofreader in-house and I'm going to factor that in. Or it could be that you tell the agency, hey, I want you to allocate 10 hours of your time every month to getting a professional proofreader to do this, so that I don't have to catch your mistakes.
Yeah, I mean, because it really should not be the client's responsibility to fix spelling, grammatical, and like if it's about if their client does TV shows and you get the time and the day wrong, then that's half the game there. So yeah, that shouldn't be happening.
It's rough. Yeah, I'm sorry that happened to this person. Sounds like something that's going to have to be managed in real time and isn't just a easy, let's just fire and start over. These things do happen. I mean, it is shocking the number of people that are in PR that aren't great writers. And to me, I don't understand it, because writing is we're talking about that with your friend Chris. And like PR is fundamentally about good writing. All right, our guest today is Mike Bush. He's a longtime PR pro colleague and good friend of ours. Mike Bush, so nice to have you on the show. Really excited to have you. For our listeners who don't know, Mike is an experienced marketing, PR, and communications manager and executive with over 15 years experience, both in agency and in in-house work. So he's got both sides of the equation under his belt, and he's also been an amazing client, one of my favorite clients of all time. And on top of that, he's a graduate of George Mason University and an amazing, passionate father.
Oh, April, thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. So I think it'll be really fun to talk with you today, Mike, about what you look for when you're hiring an agency, how you know that it's the right fit, and also, if on the agency side, how do you find the client that's the right fit for you?
Yeah, sure. So let me start with that. In terms of finding the right agency, I think there are a couple of things you have to look at. One of them is, of course, is budget. The second one is there's a balance, right? Like you want to find an agency that has relevant experience and understands the space you're in, but you don't want to take on an agency where you're going to be the smaller fish or where you're going to compete with somebody else for a story. And I'll give you an example. So the company I'm with now is a logistics company. Working with trust relations, I've been really fortunate in that, I've got a ton of B2B expertise. I've got a lot of expertise and industry experience on the team, but I don't necessarily have somebody that sees a harrow and says, oh, which client needs a media hit today? Or I don't have a client that takes some sort of pitch angle I shop over to them and says, oh, you know what? This is a really good idea. I wonder if I can piggyback it and get a second or third story for my other clients. I want to feel like the big fish and the most important client that a firm has, which is a really important consideration for me. Other things that I look at are, what is the level of expertise? Can you show me results that you've generated? I think that's a really important one. There are a lot of folks that ask for spec work or ask for, story ideas and types of pitches. I don't necessarily want that. I can find creativity by talking to any PR person in the street. I want to find somebody that's been there, done that, and can show me results. Even if it's in a different industry, I want to see the level of thought that goes into it and see actual results that have been generated.
It makes a lot of sense. And on the other side of the equation, how do you find a client that's a good fit for your agency or for you as a professional?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and it's a real challenge, right? Like there's that line of I've got experience in, say, logistics or insurance or cybersecurity, and you can bring on second and third clients there, but the question is, are you going to be doing your best work? So I like to find a team, build a small team that's got experience across a bunch of different vertical markets, try to find one or at most two clients, and if there are two clients in the same industry, in clients that are complementary to each other as opposed to competitors. It means I'm never going to build the world's biggest PR firm, but it means I'm going to be a really effective agency for the clients that I do have on my roster.
Have you run into any issues on the agency or client side that you think is something that needs to be tweaked within the PR profession?
Yeah, I think there's a real challenge in the agency world to provide value and to prove the value that you provide. And it can be a real concern. To me, I look at it and say, as an agency, am I getting a media hit every week or a couple of media hits a week? If you take a client and you're getting 2 and 3 media hits per week, you're all of a sudden looking at 10, 12 pieces of coverage and saying, this is great. But are those pieces of coverage meaningful? Do they help a client lead to sales? Are they just arrows that don't necessarily help a reporter out, that don't necessarily move the needle in any way, shape, or form? And if I look at the communication spectrum, you're probably talking to either current company employees or prospective employees. So to say, look, this is our leadership style is totally fine. To say, look, we want to be featured in a tech publication that maybe isn't inside our wheelhouse, but helps us diversify our backlinks, that's fine. To be, out there, and again, I work for a shipping company, to be out there and say like, Us magazine doesn't actually move the needle for me, and there's no real way I can connect it to any sort of ROI.
So Mike, on the other side of the equation, if you're on the agency side and the client's pushing you for an Us Weekly and you don't necessarily see how it's going to push the needle and move the needle for them, how do you recommend pushing back and managing expectations to the client, having been both the client and on the agency side, where it can be a little bit tricky?
It is a tough question. I think there has to be some level of leadership that comes out of the agency to say, look, we understand what you're trying to accomplish. We know what we're doing. We bring the expertise to the table, and let me show you an alternative route that's going to move the needle. To be on the front page of the Wall Street Journal is tremendous. It's a fantastic opportunity to say we're going to get there, and we're going to get there via trade publications, and we're going to show you, look, we know that the journal writer we want to talk to is reading these 3 blogs, because every time, they write a story, it's sourced to a couple of blogs, or it's referencing, or even, indirectly related to something that was published a couple of days earlier. Going through the trade press, going, through the right channels in order to build a story is an important component of it. If it's something that's a total long shot and doesn't make any sense for the client, I think, being willing to say, look, this is a bad idea. Let me tell you why this is a bad idea. Explaining the value that they're giving up in order to make that hit happen is a real challenging component to it. And I think it behooves an agency leader, and it behooves an agency to say, look, we're the subject matter expert. Let us show you why. And it does mean you need to push back at sometimes. And sometimes you're gonna open up a can of worms to the client.
Right. Fair enough. Have you ever had that happen?
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, look, I've had dozens of clients say, look, I want to be on the front page of this. It's never anybody like in the B2B tech space that says I want to be an Us Weekly, but I have had folks, and I think there's a real, April, one question you ask a lot is, what is the importance on a scale of Apple buys Google on down through like, look, this is a new hire press release. What is the scale of importance of the news you're going to come out with? And I think setting the expectation that not every bell and whistle you add to a product is going to be worthy of the Wall Street Journal is really important. So I think, if you can get off on the right foot, explain that, look, not every press release is going to be worthy of a top tier hit. Just because you hired somebody from New York doesn't mean the New York Times should pick it up, et cetera. I think, once you level set that, it gets off to a pretty easy start.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that. Have you had an agency push back on you in a way that you found distasteful or not helpful?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the biggest challenges I've run into with agencies is a willingness to claim credit for work that was done, or perhaps work that wasn't necessarily theirs. It goes back to that first discussion of there are opportunities to say, oh, look, there's this paid opportunity. We've all seen opportunities that are paid. We've all seen advertorials. To say, look, hey, we got you in TechCrunch when it was a paid for post is a really crazy maneuver, and I've seen that a lot. I've seen that there's a real aggression to claim credit even when the work wasn't performed. And in those instances, I think there's a real aggression to really end the relationship. It's crazy to me to say, let me go out of my way to claim credit for something I didn't necessarily do. And I've run into that a lot in the agency world. When you're in-house, one of the biggest challenges is to position the work you're doing as meaningful and to show the value and to show how much work goes into a media hit. Executives think it's very easy to get their name in the press. On the agency side, I feel like that need transfers over, but it should be your in-house contact that's touting the work you're doing. So if you can tell your in-house PR manager or comms leader, look, we've got a great opportunity, here's what it is, and let that person sell your work, because then they can take some credit on their own. It's much easier as opposed to going directly to the executive and saying, great news, we have the strongest opportunity in a tier 5 publication, or great news, we saw this fantastic hit run, when it's something that a marketing person is running an ad on.
Right. Yeah, it's not such a good look.
No, it's not. And it's the type of look that immediately gets a response that goes to the head of an agency saying, why are we claiming credit for these? What are we doing? And in that case, if the head of an agency is willing to push back and say, oh, we just wanted to provide you something you can send to the board. Well, guess what? You're not justifying your investment to the board. You're making me look really terrible if I present this to the board to say, oh, good news, our PR agency is doing ad work.
Do you think that there's too much pressure on PR firms to produce just like media hits on things that, you know, aren't newsworthy, or for weeks on end when a client doesn't have any news? And maybe that's why, well, I know it's why they claim work that they try to tout something that's really not toutable. And it's just because the pressure is so great on them, and they like kind of are at a loss of how else to come across in a good light.
Yeah, you know, Laura, I've never worked in a big agency, so I don't know what the setting is there. But in smaller agents, I've always found that it's the owner of the firm or somebody high level in the firm that's been there for a long time that's pitching the business. And they pitch these story ideas that are a little crazy, that are a little bit out there, and they're no longer the people that are on the front lines.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think one of the things that's great about trust relations is I know if April gives me counsel, it's counsel from somebody who's actually talking to reporters as opposed to somebody who shifted gears into the sales world. I was in an agency setting once where the owner of the firm said, I've got this great idea. We're going to get the astronauts in the space station to use your product in a sales meeting. It didn't matter that we got this client, the New York Times, TechCrunch, it was a tech company. It didn't matter that any of these massive media opportunities hit, Mashable featured and blah, blah, blah. None of that mattered because we weren't in the space station. And the relationship was doomed from the start.
Right.
And I feel like it's such a big challenge to say, look, let me level set expectations on day one. Let's pull together a plan that we think is going to work, that we think is going to be aggressive. And Laura, to your point of, you know, what happens when a client doesn't have news, I think you can start to delve deeper into what that client does. And a strong in-house person should be able to say, look, we don't have a press release for the next couple of months, but let me go ask the salespeople what they're running into and how that becomes a story. So when a salesperson says, we're running into the same objection that nobody wants to switch businesses because of COVID-19, let's turn that into a story. How do you switch during COVID-19? How do you switch during a pandemic? How do you ease transition? That becomes a proactive story that a lot of publications across the B2B and really whatever industry it is, landscape will pick up.
So is your relationship, especially when times are a little tough, as good as your in-house like PR people at the client?
I think you have to have PR people that understand it. And I think you have to have, not to piggyback on the name, I think you have to have trust to say, look, we're not getting the story angles that we need. We're not getting the tools we need in order to be effective for you. I think you have to be willing to have the come to Jesus meeting early to say, I've got a red flag. We're looking at the next 30 days. We're waiting on a press release. There's a client that has to approve. We know it's going to take a long time. What can we be doing in the meantime? I think to say, look, even if it's, let's pull together an executive feature. Let's find somebody in the space that maybe hasn't been profiled. Let's spend time doing media training with 3 people that aren't yet ready to be spokespeople so that when we bring you some opportunities, they're ready to go and we've got a deeper bench.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like a lot of times, especially if it's a smaller company, they don't really have PR people in-house. So like whoever, you know, has the time or what, you know, to be the contact with the agency, and that always makes it more difficult too, because they don't really know what PR is or how it works.
Sure, I think there's a great opportunity to craft sort of a list of Q&A, sort of your rainy day Q&A to say, hey, listen, Mike, we don't have a whole lot in the funnel. Let me throw 5 questions your way, and let me have you toss those over to the fence to some of your subject matter experts just to get them talking. One other thing I think, you know, that you can request, and if it's a person that doesn't understand PR, this is a great approach I've found, is to ask your marketing person, hey, listen, can you flag down 3 execs this week and ask them 2 stories they'd like to see told about the company? Those pitches are going to be worth their weight in gold. They're probably going to be thought leader in nature, or they can be shifted to thought leader in nature. And they actually show the trends that exist in a particular space are thinking about, and therefore reporters in the space should be considering writing about.
Right, and then you can get those executives quoted, hopefully, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you can proactively pitch them. You can turn it into a byline. You can turn it into, you know, something reactionary. If there's something super interesting there that's seasonal and you know it's going to be coming up in a couple of months, you know, back to school right now is the biggest story. We know Christmas is actually going to be a big story starting in a couple of months because of, you know, retailers trying to figure out what the industry they're in. Can we ask for those proactive storylines where we know retail reporters are going to be writing about Christmas? Let's find everybody who can talk about those in advance. So when we start to see retail stories about Christmas hit, we've got quotes in the can, we're ready to go, and we're able to secure placements really in a very set it and forget it way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a good point that you're making, which is that I always felt like to be a really good in-house communications person, you're almost like the reporter that's on the ground in-house for that company. And you're always going around, you're looking for the future stories, but you have to do with that even longer lead time, almost like a magazine writer, right? Like, okay, let me think through for 3 months from now, we need the story to look like this, and start going around and interviewing people in your company about what they're doing, what's going on. And I think, one of the things that came up between you and Laura's and that little exchange that you pointed out was that when there's not an in-house person that knows how to do that, if you can provide that value and kind of step in and like, all right, no problem, I see you don't have this, I'm your agency or I'm your freelancer, I'm going to just take on that role. And if they'll let you and you're that entrenched in their Slack channel, or back in the day, actually go to their office, but in the olden times,
in the land called February.
Yeah, this 3 months has taken like 5 years. It's amazing.
Right.
Oh my God, it's so weird. I know it literally feels like, remember back then when we used to have like phones on the walls?
Yeah.
Right. We go. But anyway, so I mean, back then, if you could hop in and start having conversations with people, you can almost do that role if the company will let you and they get to trust you and start asking those questions and finding the stories yourself. So I think it's a good point you bring up.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges to that is if you're a marketing person who doesn't necessarily know PR, there's a fear of saying, look, let me go to an executive and ask, what stories do you want me to tell? Because you might look a little silly to the executive. From the PR side of the world, you're thinking, wow, this is a great opportunity to figure out what thought leaders are thinking and what matters. So there has to be, again, it's that trust, it's that, transparency to say, and even if it's as a marketing person, you're positioning to an executive, listen, I think I know the answer to this, but I want to hear it in your own words so I get the nuance right. That can be a great way to get around some of the issues that come with acknowledging you maybe don't know exactly what the role is in a particular moment.
I've been in-house at big companies, and sometimes we would bring the agency and the executives to the table, literally, to talk about like, what are the big stories that you see, or what are the big things that you're working on over the next 6 months. Those are always a little bit challenging meetings, but we would get great information and story ideas that did turn into actionable outcomes. They were a little scary.
When you kick off a relationship, typically a firm will say, let's do some sort of media training. If you don't come out of that with 5 or 6 or 8 story ideas ready to go, it was a lost opportunity. Instead of saying, tell me about what your company does, going deeper to say, what's the future? What's on the horizon? What are the products you're most excited about? What does the industry need? All of those questions that come up in media training can inform at least a quarter's worth of story ideas.
What are the big business issues
100%.
for the year?
100%. Give me 15 minutes with your sales leader. I want to hear every complaint he or she has heard from their sales team as to why business isn't closing as rapidly as they'd like. Those are those 5 or 6 are items are stories that can go be told.
And so here's a question for both of you, since you spent more time in-house than I have. I only did in-house once at eMusic. I've seen sometimes that longer a client is in-house, the more they start to drink the company's Kool-Aid, and they start to think that every little tiny minute detail or change that's happening in-house is a big piece of news, even if they would have known that before, that it's maybe not. But they, it's like kind of easy
it's
to
justifying your job kind of thing, I think, maybe.
A little that, and also just losing perspective because you're so in the trenches that you start
it's the only thing you've seen for years and years and years.
Right, and so everything kinds of, these little itty bitty shifts are like, okay, it's news. And well, actually, it's a 2-part question. If you're an in-house PR person, what's your litmus test for making sure that you're still correct that what you think is news is news? And if you're an agency and you see your client veering off into this kind of drinking their own Kool-Aid land, how do you adjust expectations without offending?
So for me, I think, to make sure I'm not drinking the Kool-Aid, I'll actually think of who the person I want to write the story is. And if it's somebody that's a bigger story, a reporter at a bigger publication, then it's probably newsworthy. If to find the right person, I have to come down to a 2nd or 3rd tier trade publication, it's probably not the big story that I think it is. So I try to start with who's going to write this and who's going to be interested in it. And if I've got to go through 8 or 9 different machinations and tortured metaphors in order to get somebody interested, it's probably not the right fit. On the agency side, I think it can be more difficult to identify or to call out a client and say, look, you're a new hire, but it's not the end all be all of all stories. Steve Jobs didn't come back from the dead to join your company. This is probably not paid for news. So the question there is to say, okay, where are the other places a story like that can be valuable? Where are there other opportunities in order to build sort of a bigger narrative? 10 or 15 years ago, blogs were like a brand new thing. Now every company has some sort of newsroom or blog, to say, look, can we take this piece of news and turn it into a recurring feature? Can we turn it into something that we post on the blog as a way to get it out there? We save our dollars that we would put towards a newswire service or whatever it may be. Let's, find all of the, people on the move sections for a new hire. We'll go after those. We'll figure out where this person is from so we can get them in their local hometown paper and they can share it with mom, or better said, mom and dad can send a picture and say, look what we saw in the paper today. I think being able to position, here's where this particular asset will be effective, and here's where we'd save something for sort of a longer term play can be really helpful. But again, it comes back to having somebody in-house that's willing to both trust you to say, hey, look, this is not what you think it is, and also to accept that counsel.
I would say the in-house job that I had the longest by far was at PwC. And we were a little bit spoiled there because pretty much anything we wanted to say to anybody, they would listen to us.
Yeah,
so you didn't have that problem.
I didn't really.
PwC sneezed and it's newsworthy.
Yeah. In their world, in their business world, we could at least get it into the top trade, if not, the Financial Times or the Wall Street Journal or CNBC, we could at least get them into a top trade. At some point, somebody would talk to them about it. And maybe the worst case is that they didn't run a story, but somebody would at least talk to them about it. And also, I think, I'm pretty cynical. So if somebody said something like crazy, I'd be like, no. But I really didn't have to much because anything that we said, because it's like a market making sort of company,
Right.
That totally makes sense.
Yeah.
So you're spoiled.
Yeah. So I was thinking when I was saying that, like, oh my God, then why wouldn't you want that job as a PR person? All you have to do is be like, hi, I'm here. And then like wonderful things happen. But what I would say on the negative side of that is that it gets a little rote. Like there's not a lot of creativity in that, you're just sort of like, oh, here's a press release or here's a report they put out. Put it to the, and I had a lot of PR firms because I oversaw a lot of different business units. And so the PR firms were awesome and they would go and do their job and they would get tons of meetings or interviews or hits. And then we would come back and every quarter, and I did this, we would be the top media getting, Big Four firm every quarter forever.
Okay.
That's as negative as I can get, and I know that's not very negative. Most people would like to have that problem.
And it's funny, when you're in a startup world, you're desperately looking for the set it and forget it opportunities. You're desperately looking for something that resonates once and then saying, how do I recreate this on a basis? It's so funny. Right,
but PwC would spend $1 million to create something that would be relevant every year. So most companies can't do that. So I have found now that I've been working with many more startups that I've said it's been like I've gone back to school and I've really learned the nuts and bolts and what you have to do to try to find the news and get the interviews. And I really think that it's helpful to sort of go back to school that way because I think now I'm even more valuable to any company.
Yeah, I agree with that. Because I was really spoiled too when I first was in the agency world. I was working at, the biggest agencies in the world and they had the biggest clients in the world. And so how hard is it to get, the C-suite of Semper Energy or MasterCard or right? It's like, okay, you just make a phone call to Bloomberg and it's and you think you're a genius, like you're landing them these amazing hits all the time, but you don't realize until you start your own company and you're working at startups that are in a very different category and you have to create a reputation out of nothing.
Yeah,
it's like it's the whole skill set. But I think to Laura's point, if you can do that, you can do anything. In a way, I think it makes you a stronger professional. And I know Mike's had some of that too, so he can relate.
Yeah, I think the most interesting thing with a startup is finding something that's unique and finding a hook that nobody else is willing to bring to the table. Years ago, I worked with a company that was doing fixed wireless technology, and it was sort of like 5G before 5G existed. And they had a New York City presence, and in fact, their biggest point of presence was on top of the Empire State Building. So in order to go and sort of see it and show what a mesh network looks like in New York, you actually had to go 15 stories above the observation deck and climb out a window on the Empire State Building to do this. So that became one of our recurring sort of set it and forget it initiatives, is that we would take a reporter to some place that they could never otherwise see. AT&T or whoever was never going to say, let's go up there. Our company was able to do that pretty regularly. And I tell the joke that security actually escorted myself and a couple of reporters out one time. And then I got a reporter from Bloomberg thrown up the Empire State Building is my favorite.
Was it Mike Bloomberg? Just kidding.
It was not.
That's amazing. I love it. Well, Mike, I know we've taken a lot of your time. I'd like to ask you a final closing question and then ask you if there's anything you want to add to it. But what we're hoping for with this podcast is that we're going to be reaching a younger audience of people that are new to the PR world to help educate them and help them feel that there is a place of normalcy within the, agency and an in-house world where there's a silver lining if maybe they're not finding it where they are now, so that they aren't throwing the towel in on PR altogether. So do you have any advice for young people that might be listening and are questioning whether or not they really want to do PR?
Yeah. So if we assume somebody is really interested in doing PR, the best advice I can give you as a younger PR person who's just getting their start is to find a bunch of reporters that are probably similar in age that you think are really smart. And the reason I say this is as somebody moves from covering a beat at a local paper or covering something very industry specific at a third tier trade press, they throughout their career are going to get to bigger and bigger publications, and they're going to remember the people that they grew up with. I was fortunate when I started in PR that sites like Mashable were really difficult to show clients the value of. Mashable was so small that clients would say it's only a second or third tier publication. But if you looked at Adam Ostro and Kristen Nicole and this great group of reporters, it was really easy to see these were smart people who were going to go on to great things. So building those relationships and keeping those relationships, connecting on LinkedIn and saying, hey, I saw you got an opportunity. Congratulations on the hire. Making sure that, you're never going to be the best friend. We're not going to go back to a place where you can call a reporter and say, let's go out for coffee or let's go out for a drink. It's much harder than it used to be.
Especially now you're not meeting anybody, right?
Oh gosh, again, 3 months ago it was impossible because reporters didn't have enough time. Now forget about it. But find reporters that are in your demographic and in your age range that are your level of experience, and grow with them so that as they go on to bigger publications, as you're in a selling position or as you're talking to a client and you can say, oh, I've worked with that person 5 or 6 times over the past couple of years, you will win that business 10 times out of 10. So I think that's the most critical thing if you've decided to stay in it.
That's really interesting. And I've had it happen to me very recently twice. So literally it took 15 to 20 years for what you just said to come to fruition, but it was so useful. One was, I know the new US editor of The Drum from 20 years ago. And I saw that he got this amazing job. He hasn't even been reporting for a decade. And he was like, wait, weren't you the one who used to pitch me, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, yeah, you were the one who used to write about Coke all the time. And ha, ha, ha. So like I got back, 20 years ago. And it was like so easy. And so you never know. PR is so small, right? And like even the whole country of PR, because I've been in New York. These people were, some in New York, some in LA, a generation later. So you just never know.
Sure, I think that's a critical component. And the other thing I would say is, when you find somebody who's really good in PR, you don't necessarily anticipate that you're going to work with them for years and years and years. I don't think there's a longevity. I think people hop jobs a little more.
Coming in and out, yeah, totally.
But being willing to say, look, you were great when we worked together in a previous place. We'll see each other again. I think being a bad breaker-upper in PR is a really awful approach because there are so many good opportunities to bring good people along with you. And I mean, I look at the way trust relations is built, and that seems to be the case. Let's go find the best people we can bring. Let's put them together. Let's build a fantastic approach and a fantastic firm. Over time, that's going to pay off. People are going to leave the firm to go in-house, and they're going to turn around and say, oh, I know who I want as my PR firm.
Right.
That's already happened once.
At least once that I know of. Yeah, I mean, for folks that are new to the industry and they're trying to figure out whether this is the right fit, I think finding a separate skill that you can bring to the table that maybe relates a little more helps to position you as a PR person. So if you come from a marketing background and you're very interested in how SEO works, applying SEO principles to PR can be a great way to sort of straddle that line, build and hone skills and decide, is this the right fit for me? Because then you're creating a challenge that for yourself that you're excited to try to go solve, as opposed to trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. Ultimately it's not for everybody. I think most PR people hear no from a reporter 9 out of every 10 times they pitch a story that they know they're going to get ignored.
Nothing, right.
right. You know, like in baseball, you fail 7 out of 10 times, you go to the Hall of Fame. In PR, you know, if you're 1 out of 10, you're probably going to the Hall of Fame at the end of the day. So, you know, having that thick skin and being willing to learn is also a critical component to it.
I agree with
So
that.
April, if you're batting 300 or better in baseball, that's what he
Yes.
was saying. We talk about baseball. I make her talk about baseball all the time.
But what's funny is that I'm not actually a sports fan, but I did grow up as a total jock.
Okay.
So I actually do know what batting
Like
300
the rules and right on.
Oh yeah, no, I was in varsity softball when I was in 8th grade.
So you didn't even mention that though. Okay.
So I liked playing sports. I just didn't like watching.
Follow it.
Yeah. I like doing it. The fandom part never took off.
Right. You were the big star.
I guess that's what I'm saying. I want to be the star. I don't want to watch anyone else. I'm joking. I should never share that story ever again. Oh God, too funny. Well, on that note, Mike, do you have anything else you want to add?
No, listen. I mean, it's been a tremendous couple of years working with Trust Relations and on both sides of the fence here, and you know, I'm super grateful to be part of the podcast and hope this was worthwhile.
Absolutely, really appreciate your time and your being a part of the ongoing team. We appreciate it. Well, thanks for joining us for the PR Wind Down, and it was such a great pleasure to have Mike on.
I know he was great. I'm glad to have gotten a chance to meet him on our little podcast.
Yeah, and hey, everybody, don't forget you can share your anonymous stories with us, so you can get your own horror story heard. We'll never share who you are, and the email address is going to be in the episode description below. We can't wait to wind down with you again next time.